I walked into my own apartment and found my son showing it to a realtor like I was already dead. His wife smiled, said it was perfect for the nursery. Then Adam turned to me, calm as anything, and said, "You'll die soon anyway, Mum. Why not give it to us now?" That's when I knew they weren't planning to wait. They were planning to erase me. But what they didn't know, I had already started erasing them. From my will, from my accounts, from my life, and by the time they realized what I'd done, I was gone. Before we start, please make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this, and also comment where you're watching from. Thanks. My name is Elena Whitaker. I'm 72 years old, and last Tuesday I walked into my own apartment and realized my son had already buried me in his mind. I had just come back from my usual morning walk, the one I take every day, around the block with a cup of tea in hand and a scarf tied over my rollers, same as I've done for years. When I pushed open my front door and heard voices that didn't belong. At first I thought maybe Adam had stopped by to check on me, which he rarely does anymore unless Tiffany nags him into it. But then I heard her voice too, all syrupy and bright, echoing through my living room like she owned it. "And here's the kitchen," she chirped. "You said the sunlight is great for staging, right?" I stood, frozen in the entryway, the grocery bag sliding slightly from my arm, and then I saw them. Adam in one of his stiff button-downs and Tiffany with her fake nails wrapped around a Starbucks cup, walking a smiling woman in heels through my apartment like they were on HGTV. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just watched. Tiffany opened the cabinet under my sink without asking. Adam pointed toward the wall where I still had my late husband's military photo hanging. "This whole section could come out," he said, nodding like he'd already done the demo in his head. Finally, the realtor asked, "And your mum's okay with the timing?" And that's when Adam looked over and saw me standing there, still holding the damn milk, and he didn't even flinch. "Mum," he said like he just noticed I existed, "we were going to tell you, but come on, be honest. You're going to die soon. You've had a good run, right?" I swear, I didn't feel my body in that moment, like my soul had stepped out and was watching from across the room. Tiffany looked mildly uncomfortable, but not enough to stop nodding. "It just makes sense," she added. "You have no stairs, great lighting, and we really need a space for the baby. There is no baby. There isn't even a pregnancy yet. Just a Pinterest board and a desperation to play house." I remember setting the groceries down and walking to my chair. No one stopped talking. No one asked if I was okay. Adam just kept pacing, gesturing at walls while Tiffany told the realtor they'd have it cleaned out in a month. Maybe sooner, if I was cooperative. Cooperative, like I was a squatter in my own life. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually they all left, chattering down the hall about paint swatches. When the door closed behind them, I just stared at the dented corner of the coffee table, the one Adam chipped when he was 6, pretending to be Batman. That night, I poured a glass of red wine, turned off all the lights, and sat in the dark. My heart wasn't broken. It was something deeper, a quiet, still thing. Sometimes I realized I was never really seen. I was a convenience, a stepping stone, and now that they thought I had nothing left to give, they were ready to erase me. That was the night I stopped being afraid of dying. That was the night I started planning. The next morning I woke up at 6, same as always, made my coffee, fed the cat, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where Tiffany had stood, holding her overpriced coffee like she'd already moved in. I wasn't sad anymore. I felt something else. Steady, cold, focused. I knew I had to protect myself, not just emotionally, but legally. Because if they were bold enough to parade a realtor through my home while I was still living there, then they were capable of far worse. So I dug through my drawer of old electronics until I found the tiny voice recorder Adam bought me years ago when I said I might start writing a book. I charged it, tested it, and the next time Adam came over, I made sure it was rolling, inside my purse, zipped half open on the floor near the couch. He didn't even knock when he entered, just walked in like he was already on the lease. Tiffany trailing behind with her shiny new haircut and some fake smile she must have practiced in the mirror. "We just want to help you, Mom," Adam said, as if that line was supposed to absolve him of everything. "It's not safe for you to be living alone. What if you fall? What if you forget the stove?" I asked if he remembered the last time I forgot anything. He didn't answer. Instead, Tiffany sighed and took out her phone. "We've been looking into assisted living," she said, scrolling like she was booking me a hotel, to short-term until we figure out long-term care options. That was the moment I knew they weren't planning to wait for me to die. They were planning to shove me into a facility, claim I was losing my mind, and take everything while I was still breathing. I smiled politely and nodded, told them I'd think about it. Then I walked them to the door, waved them off like a sweet old lady who didn't know better, and, as soon as they turned the corner, I yanked the recorder out of my purse and played it back. Every word was there, Tiffany's patronizing tone, Adam's fake concern, and their entire plan laid out like a blueprint. I emailed the file to myself, saved it to 2 flash drives, and hid them in different drawers around the apartment, just in case. That same day I called Margaret. She's my oldest friend, the one person who's never made me feel like an afterthought. We met for tea at her place, and I told her everything, what they said, what they did, how they acted like I was already gone. She didn't say much at first, just kept sipping from her mug and listening with those sharp eyes she's always had. Then she reached into her filing cabinet and pulled out a business card. "He helped my sister when her kids tried to do the same thing," she said. The card was for a lawyer, David Levinson, specializes in elder law and financial abuse. I called him the next day, told him I needed to know exactly what I could do before anyone tried to take what I'd built. David didn't talk to me like I was some clueless old woman. He talked to me like a client. He told me to start documenting everything, to not sign anything, and most importantly, to not let on that I was preparing for a fight. That night, I tucked the recorder back in my purse, triple-checked my locks, and started a folder on my desktop labeled Groceries, so no one would look twice if they found it. Inside that folder, I started collecting proof, because if my own son was going to try and erase me, I was going to make damn sure I had receipts. A week after I met with David, I walked down to the building office to ask about renewing my lease early, just to keep things secure. But the minute I stepped inside and said my name, the assistant manager gave me this weird pause, like she didn't know what to say. "You're not on the lease anymore," she said finally, flipping through her clipboard like the paper could explain it better. I felt a jolt in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, even though I could feel the blood rushing behind my ears. She hesitated again, then pulled out the lease record and turned it toward me. It had Adam's name on it, only his. My name had been crossed out in pen. Crossed out, like I was a note someone didn't need anymore. I told her that had to be a mistake, and she nodded nervously, said she'd have to talk to the building supervisor. But I could tell from her eyes that this wasn't a new development. I walked home, slow, like my knees had aged 20 years in 10 minutes. When I got to my apartment, I opened every drawer, every file folder, searching for the last lease copy I signed. And there it was, my signature. Dated. Still legal. I took photos, scanned it, and sent it to David immediately. He called back within the hour, voice steady but sharper now. "This is fraud," he said. "They can't legally remove you without your consent, especially if you're still paying rent." I told him I was. Every month, on time, from my own account. "Then we've got grounds," he said. "But don't confront them yet. Let them keep thinking they're getting away with it." That night, I didn't sleep. I just laid there in the dark, watching the hallway shadows stretch across the ceiling, and thought about how many little ways Adam had probably been preparing this takeover. The fake concern, the sudden interest in my prescriptions, the constant checking in about bills. It wasn't kindness. It was inventory. He'd been treating me like a dying business he was waiting to liquidate. The next morning I checked my mail and found a flyer slipped between bills for a local estate planner. I knew immediately it wasn't random. The company was the same one Tiffany had mentioned during their last visit, the one her cousin worked. That's when I realized they were probably hoping to push me into early planning. Not for my sake, but so they could control every asset before I even got a funeral. I threw the flyer in the trash, then took out my savings book from the fireproof box under my bed. I had enough to make moves if I had to. Not rich, but I'd been smart, careful, quiet about what I had. I started writing a list that night. Everything I owned that could be sold quickly. Everything with resale value. Everything they might try to touch. Jewelry, antiques, even my late husband's coin collection tucked behind the bookshelf. I wasn't going to wait for them to take it. I was going to disappear with it. And when they came looking for my things, they'd find nothing but air and memories they didn't deserve to keep. By the end of that week, I had a plan. Not perfect, not polished, but good enough to move in silence while they kept thinking I was some forgetful old woman who still used a flip phone and didn't know how online banking worked. The first thing I did was go through my jewelry box and separate everything into 3 piles. Things I wore often that they'd expect to see, things I could pawn without anyone noticing, and sentimental pieces I would never sell, no matter how desperate I got. Then I took the second pile and drove 3 towns over to a quiet little pawn shop I remembered from years back, run by a woman named Carla, who once complimented my sapphire brooch at church. She didn't ask questions, just appraised each item with a careful eye and handed me a thick envelope of cash without even blinking. I left with just a receipt and a quiet heartbeat that told me I'd crossed into new territory. After that, I listed some of the furniture on a private resale site under a fake name. Just the big pieces I could live without, like the glass cabinet Adam always said was outdated, and the vintage lamp Tiffany kept side-eyeing like she was already planning where to put it. They sold fast, no questions asked, and I scheduled pickups when I knew Adam wouldn't be visiting. With every transaction, I felt lighter, like I was peeling off layers of their expectations. I even sold the piano no one had touched in 20 years except for the cleaner. That one hurt a little, but not enough to make me stop. I started taking inventory of my bank accounts next, closing 2 of them and moving everything into a new high-security account David helped me open under a trust name. It was a pain getting all the paperwork right, but it meant Adam couldn't find it, touch it, or even know it existed unless I told him, which I never would. I cleared out the safe deposit box too, the one in the bank downtown that Adam didn't even know I had. I moved its contents, old bonds, personal letters, and my husband's watch, to Margaret's house in a locked case. She didn't ask questions, just poured me tea and nodded like she'd been waiting for this version of me to show up. Then I called the realtor. Not the one from before. This time I picked a woman named Laya, who worked solo and specialized in quiet sales. I told her I wanted to list the apartment discreetly. No open houses, no signs, just serious offers. She was efficient, respectful, and didn't blink when I said I wanted it done fast. Clean sale, no hand-holding, I told her. I want to be gone before anyone realizes I'm leaving. She gave me a look like she understood exactly who I was escaping from. By the end of the month, the listing was live under a coded ID, and the showings were scheduled only when I was out for errands or appointments. I kept Adam and Tiffany completely in the dark. When they visited, I made sure the place looked the same. Same throw pillows, same family photos. Even though most of what they were seeing was now an illusion, the cabinets were nearly empty. The closet had half its clothes. The bookshelves were down to decoys. They didn't notice. They never noticed anything unless it benefited them. What they didn't realize was that the apartment they were standing in wasn't mine anymore. Not emotionally, not spiritually, and soon, not legally. I was already gone. They were just talking to a ghost in a familiar chair. I had just finished finalizing the sale agreement when Margaret called and asked me to come over for tea again, her voice low and different, like she was holding something back. And when I got there, I could tell she'd been sitting with whatever it was for a while, because she already had 2 cups poured and a manila envelope sitting dead center on the coffee table, like it was watching us. I sat down, feeling the usual comfort of her living room. Same crochet blanket draped over the armrest, same cat snoozing in the corner. But the air was heavier than usual, like we were about to step into something we couldn't walk back from. And Margaret didn't waste time. She slid the envelope toward me and said, "You deserve to know everything before you leave," which hit me like a sideways slap, because I hadn't told her I was leaving yet. Not really, not officially. But I guess old friends feel these things. I opened the envelope slowly, half afraid of what was inside, and pulled out a stack of papers. The first one being a birth certificate. Not Adam's, but his mother's, my sister, Laia, and just seeing her name made my throat tighten, because I hadn't spoken it out loud in years. Not since the funeral. Not since I buried every part of that story to keep it from spilling over into Adam's life. Margaret was watching me, quiet, waiting. "You weren't wrong to raise him like your own," she said finally. "But he deserves to know. And so do you." And that's when it hit me. Adam didn't know. He didn't know that Laia was his real mother, that I was just the aunt who stepped in when she couldn't get clean, who changed every diaper and stayed up through every fever and first heartbreak, who kept the lie alive because it felt safer than the truth. He didn't know. And now the boy I saved was the man trying to bury me alive, in paperwork and lies. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, staring at the document, remembering how small he was when I first brought him home, how he used to cling to my leg when strangers got too close, how he used to call me Mummy Ellie before he dropped the Ellie completely. Margaret reached over and rested her hand on mine. "If you're going to walk away, walk with everything," she said. "No more secrets, not even from yourself." I took the envelope home and hid it in the same drawer where I kept my updated will. I didn't plan to tell Adam. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But having the truth in my hands made everything clearer. He had never really been mine, not by blood. But I had loved him like he was, given him everything. And now I was watching him auction off my life like it was just old furniture he didn't want to clean. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding that envelope, and felt something settle in my chest. Not grief, not anger, but a kind of cold finality. I was no longer fighting for just my home. I was fighting for my name, my story, the truth of what I'd built and protected for decades. And I knew without a doubt that Adam would never see me again. not unless I wanted him to, and by then it would be far too late. After I put the DNA envelope away, I stopped sleeping through the night. Not because I was afraid, but because my brain wouldn't shut off, wouldn't stop circling through worst-case scenarios, playing out every angle of how Adam and Tiffany might try to accelerate their plan. And by the third sleepless night, I decided I needed proof stronger than words on a recorder, something they couldn't twist or deny. So I bought a nanny cam online, disguised as a table lamp, and placed it in the corner of my living room where it could catch everything. Then, wait, and sure enough, they came again that Sunday, right after church. Tiffany bringing a store-bought pie, like she'd remembered I liked blueberry, when I've hated it my whole life. And Adam was all smiles, trying to butter me up, saying things like, "We've been talking, and we think you might really like this community center we found." And I knew right away what they were doing, trying to look like caring children on camera, trying to bait me into agreeing with something that would later be used against me. So I smiled, nodded, played the harmless old lady routine, and offered them tea while Tiffany went to the bathroom. Only she didn't go to the bathroom. She slipped into my bedroom instead, and I knew, because the hallway light sensor flicked on and I heard the click of my medicine cabinet door, the one she didn't think squeaked. And I sat there at the table with Adam, talking about made-up places and activities, while Tiffany came back with this smug little grin, like she just planted a flag. And I knew whatever she did, it was bad. So I didn't say a word, just let them finish their performance, thanked them for the pie, and walked them out with a smile that didn't touch my eyes. And the second that door closed, I raced to my room and opened the cabinet to find 3 bottles of my medication switched out for expired ones. Labels just barely off, not enough to notice unless you looked closely. And I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because they were so damn obvious, so sure of themselves, and I ran straight to my laptop and checked the footage, every second of it, watching Tiffany's reflection as she slipped into my room, rummaged, swapped the pills, then stood in front of the mirror and practiced a concerned face, like she was rehearsing for a call to Adult Protective Services, and my stomach turned. Not from fear, but from rage, deep and controlled. And I clipped the footage, backed it up twice, then emailed a copy to David with the subject line, "They crossed the line." And he called me within an hour, his voice calm but tight, telling me we were officially in legal territory now, that I had enough for a restraining order if I wanted it. But I told him, no, not yet. Not until I was ready to make the final move, because they still thought I was a step behind, and I needed that illusion to last just a little longer. That night I took the lamp camera and moved it to the dining room, just in case they came back before the sale was finalized, and I stood in the middle of my emptying apartment, bare walls, half-packed boxes, furniture gone piece by piece, and realized I didn't feel sad. Not even a little, because the space they wanted was just that, a space. But the part they could never have, not even if they got the keys, was me. The part that remembered birthdays and late-night fevers, that held tiny hands and forgave tantrums, that sacrificed youth and savings for the boy who now thought he was clever enough to gaslight the woman who raised him. And I swore in that moment that when I disappeared, I wouldn't leave a single damn breadcrumb for them to follow. Once the footage was secured and David confirmed it was legally damning enough to hold up in court, I moved into the final stage of my plan. The will. Not the outdated copy Adam had probably snooped through years ago, thinking he'd already won just because he saw his name listed as the sole beneficiary. Not knowing I was about to erase that version of the future entirely, Though I met David at his office the following Thursday, wearing my nicest cardigan and carrying every piece of documentation we'd gathered, including the video of Tiffany tampering with my medication, the audio files from their fake concern visits, the forged lease paperwork, and even the photos of empty drawers and sold belongings to prove they were trying to dismantle my life piece by piece while pretending to help. And when David asked me what I wanted to do with the will, I didn't hesitate. I told him to cut Adam out completely. No warning, no explanation, not even $1. And instead, I set up a trust that would fund a women's shelter in my late sister Lia's name. Because, despite her demons, she was still Adam's real mother, and she deserved to be remembered for something more than a death certificate and a closed casket. And the rest I left to the places that had kept me grounded, my church, the school where I taught for 30 years, and to Margaret, who had never once treated me like a burden, even when I showed up at her door shaking and scared. And as David typed up the final clauses, I felt something inside me settle, like a door had closed for good. Because this wasn't just paperwork. It was my voice, on record, saying, I see what you did, and you don't get to win. And after I signed it, we locked it in his fireproof cabinet, then made 3 copies, one for him, one for me, and one sealed envelope I told him to mail only when I gave the word. And as I walked out of that office into the sunlight, I felt lighter, like I'd stepped out of a version of my life that had been held hostage by guilt and duty, and stepped into one where I was finally allowed to put myself first. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect, because the apartment closed 2 days later. The buyer paid in full, no questions asked, and I transferred the money straight into the trust account with no traceable link to Adam, not even a shared mailing address. And by the time he came knocking that Sunday, with Tiffany clinging to his arm and a forced smile plastered on his face, I was already packed, my keys in my purse, a prepaid phone in my pocket, and the only thing left behind was a handwritten note taped to the inside of the kitchen cabinet. You mourn me before I died. Now live with it. And by the time they realized what I'd done, I was already 3 states away, sipping coffee on the balcony of a modest little 1-bedroom I'd rented under my maiden name, surrounded by neighbors who didn't know my past, who just saw me as another quiet woman starting over. And for the first time in decades, I slept through the night with the window open. No pills, no fear, no one waiting to take what was mine. It only took 2 weeks before the peace was broken by a thick white envelope shoved into my new mailbox. No return address, but I didn't need one, because the name stamped across the top, Whitaker versus Whitaker, told me everything I needed to know. And when I opened it, my hands didn't shake, not because I wasn't furious, but because I had expected this exact tantrum the moment Adam realized he'd been written out of the will and outmaneuvered at every turn. And sure enough, it was a lawsuit, claiming emotional distress, financial sabotage, and some pathetic attempt to paint me as mentally unstable, the kind of woman who'd been manipulated by outside parties, meaning David and Margaret, and that I'd been coerced into making changes that didn't reflect my true wishes, which would have been laughable if it wasn't so transparent. But what really made my blood boil was the part where Tiffany included a written statement claiming I had frequent episodes of paranoia, citing the hidden camera lamp as proof that I had been spying on family members out of irrational fear, completely leaving out the part where she was tampering with medication and building a case to have me committed. And the worst part was, I could picture the smug way she probably signed that document, like she was starring in a courtroom drama, rehearsing fake tears and humble expressions, while Adam sat next to her, pretending to be the heartbroken son who just wanted what was best for his mother. And I swear, for a moment, I could feel their voices in my head, twisting everything, trying to drag me back into the role of the confused old woman they could control. But I didn't let it stick. Not for a second. Because I had everything: footage, documentation, and David, who had already anticipated this move and filed a counterclaim that same day, citing elder abuse, fraud, and attempted medical manipulation. And I didn't even need to testify, because the evidence spoke louder than I ever could. And when Adult Protective Services received the footage and our sworn statements, they opened an investigation into both Adam and Tiffany for coercion and exploitation. Which meant I finally got to watch them squirm, legally and financially, without lifting a single finger. And even though they tried to spin it to friends and extended family as a misunderstanding, the truth leaked out slowly, piece by piece. Especially after David made sure the video clips were filed publicly as part of the court documents. And the real gut punch came when Adam tried to dispute the property sale and was informed the apartment had legally belonged to me and had been sold under a registered trust. He had no access to, no claim over, not even a loophole to exploit, and I imagined him pacing in his over-decorated kitchen, shouting at Tiffany while she scrolled through her phone, trying to find someone to blame other than themselves. And meanwhile, I sat on my balcony, sipping iced tea and watching birds land on the railing. Surrounded by potted plants I picked out, with no one's opinion but my own. Feeling more alive than I had in years, because, for the first time, every decision I made was mine. Not driven by guilt or obligation or some twisted version of love. And when David called to say the case had been dismissed with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile it, I thanked him, hung up and played my favorite old jazz record, just loud enough to fill the apartment, letting the music wrap around me like a celebration. Because this wasn't just about winning. It was about reclaiming every piece of myself they had tried to strip away, and knowing that, no matter how many tantrums they threw, I had built a wall they couldn't climb, and for once I was finally safe on the other side of it. The day Adam showed up at my new address, it wasn't dramatic. No yelling, no banging, no police. But the second I opened the door and saw him standing there, travel-worn and hollow-eyed, with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a jacket I didn't recognize, I knew this wasn't a power move. It was desperation. The last card of a man who had finally realized he'd lost something he couldn't buy back. And for a moment, neither of us said anything. Just stood in that small doorway where strangers usually passed me by without a glance. And I took in the sight of him. Older, somehow, like the weight of everything had started sinking in, and then he spoke. Soft, like the boy I remembered from 1,000 lifetimes ago, and said, "Mum, I'm sorry." And those 3 words hit harder than all the betrayal, because they came too late, years too late, after everything had already shattered and been swept away, and I didn't move, didn't open the door any wider, just looked at him and waited, because whatever apology he had, it wasn't going to fix what he'd done. And he seemed to know that, because he didn't ask to come in. Didn't mention the lawsuit, or the money, or Tiffany. He just stood there and told me he messed up, that he got lost in the idea of control, that he thought he was doing the right thing until he watched it all fall apart and realized I wasn't the one losing anything. He was. And I wanted to believe him. I did. Because the mother part of me still lived somewhere in my chest, quiet but not dead. But the woman he tried to erase had finally found her spine, and she wasn't going to fold just because he remembered how to cry. So I let him talk. Let him say how he missed the Sunday breakfasts, how he found one of my old scarves in a drawer and it still smelled like my perfume. How he'd been checking the trust website every week just to see if my name was still there, if I was still alive. And when he finally stopped, I asked the only question that mattered. Do you regret what you did, or do you just regret losing? And he didn't answer right away, just looked down at the floor, like maybe the truth was too ugly to say out loud. And I nodded, because that was my answer. And I told him, gently, without anger but without softness, "You mourned me before I died, Adam. I'm just honoring your wish." And then I stepped back and closed the door. Not slammed it, not locked it in his face, just closed it, like the end of a book I'd finished reading, a story that had gone on too long. And as I turned and walked back to my chair by the window, the one with the Afghan I crocheted last winter, I felt the strangest peace wash over me. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I finally knew that the part of me that had waited for him to wake up was done waiting. And for the rest of that day, I didn't replay the conversation or imagine a different ending. I just folded laundry, made soup, and let the silence settle around me, like a friend I finally trusted again. After Adam walked away and I closed that door, things didn't change overnight, but the silence felt different, more mine, more settled. And I got back to living day by day without looking over my shoulder or checking the hallway camera twice before making coffee. And that kind of peace, even when it's quiet, is loud in its own way. The apartment was small but bright, and the people in this community were the kind that brought you soup when you had a cold and left extra tomatoes from their garden at your door without a note. Andrew worked so hard that he only had days off, actually. The men served him at Romy's without a note, and for the first time in years, I wasn't defined by who I used to be or what had been taken from me. I was just Ellender. Or Ellie, depending on who was calling. I kept a notebook by my nightstand, and slowly, without much thought at first, I started writing it all down. Not because I wanted revenge, and not because I thought anyone would care, but because, if this happened to me, it had probably happened to someone else too. And maybe if they read it, they'd know they weren't losing their mind. I didn't call it a story. I just called it notes. And when I finished, I typed it up and emailed it to a local women's newsletter I found through a friend at our book club. They publish essays and true-life experiences. Anonymous, if requested. And I didn't expect much, but a month later, I got an email from the editor saying it had been shared over 100 times, mostly forwarded between churches, retirement groups, and a couple of elder law forums. No spotlight, no viral post. Just slow, quiet sharing. And that was enough. A few weeks after that, one of the aides at our centre mentioned the story in passing, said she read something that reminded her of her grandmother, and I just nodded. Even Margaret didn't know until I told her over coffee, and she just smiled, shook her head and said, "Of course you did." I didn't put my name on it. Didn't want to. It wasn't about me. It was about the warning. Because this kind of thing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in pieces. Through politeness, through pressure, through smiles that hide paperwork. Adam never reached out again after that visit. Tiffany didn't either. I don't know if they ever read it, and honestly, I don't need to know. What matters is that the story is out there now, exactly how it happened. And if someone recognizes themselves in it, maybe it helps them do one small thing differently. Hide that account. Save that receipt. Trust their gut before someone tells them they're imagining things. That's why I shared it. That's why I'm here. And if you're hearing this now, if you've made it this far, then I guess it worked. I stayed alive. And they didn't get what they came for. Not my apartment. Not my money, and sure as hell, not my silence. Now, I'm curious about you, who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen one story that will definitely surprise you.